What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here at the end of the week prior to Super Bowl week, where we're going to get all the quotes and media attention right starting next week when both teams go down to New Orleans and we get the whole show started on Monday. But for right now on today's show, we got a couple stories to get to on today's agenda, starting with looking at the situation in Cincinnati with their two star wide receivers, T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase. Both of them are inching towards a new contract, more so T. Higgins than Ja'Marr Chase. But what's the difficulty and the level of attainment that the Bengals can have in actually doing that? Their general manager had something to say about it, so we're going to react to it on today's show. And also, speaking of general managers in New York, one of our favorites, Joe Schoen, also talked about some more on their draft plan, what his expectations are with the number 3 overall pick, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as to what kind of options they have at number 3, not just in the draft, but in the entire offseason. That and more coming up on today's show. And before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make on today's show, don't hesitate to do so. Any opinion, comment, or just anything you'd like to say on these live shows is very much appreciated, and we invite it to get your guys' sense of what we're talking about and just a different perspective that we can incorporate into these conversations. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message gets seen and stands out and gets featured on today's show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. You can use the Super Chat feature by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way just to support our show. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button and let us keep bringing you the sports content you love, and also getting involved with it always makes it a lot more fun. So again, hit the Super Chat button and let us know what's on your mind. So with that now out of the way, we can start with our first topic, talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. And yeah, I mean, a familiar topic, right? Because last offseason was filled with a lot of wide receiver news, right? We had the Brandon Ayuk stuff going on, T. Higgins as well for a little bit, A.J. Brown getting extended, Justin Jefferson getting a new contract, CeeDee Lamb also got a new contract as well. Last offseason was filled with a lot of great news for a bunch of wide receivers that got paid accordingly for all the work that they do out there on Sunday. So that was great to see, and there was a lot of new deals and things like that, but one that didn't get a new deal was T. Higgins, and T. Higgins was in the market for a new contract, obviously, after his 4 years had been, run to the end. And he doesn't have a fifth-year option, right, because he was drafted in the second round. So there was more urgency for the Bengals to get it done last offseason. But things really didn't go anywhere at any point, really, during last offseason. There was also talks with Ja'Marr Chase about potentially extending him, right, because he was also eligible to get an extension, but the Bengals decided to put off on that, and instead of, doing anything with T. Higgins, like trading him or anything like that, they decided to just franchise tag him, and now we're at the end of that, right? Now we're in January, basically February, and things are not looking great from my point of view, right? From my perspective, I think things are heading in the wrong direction for the Bengals, right? And not only that, but now, if last offseason, right, there was that whole situation with Ja'Marr Chase and how it got a little bit awkward, I guess you could say, in training camp when he was kind of holding out because he thought he was going to get a new contract, but at the end he didn't, and he ended up playing, right? He actually didn't hold out into the season, but there was a bit of a cold feeling there between the organization and Ja'Marr Chase, right, to not give him that contract. And then, don't you know it, he goes out and wins the Triple Crown, right? If anything, just pushing that price tag up a little bit more for him this offseason now. But for the Bengals, Ja'Marr Chase can be playing on his fifth-year option this upcoming year, so they still technically have time. And then if they don't even get anything done after that, they could still use the franchise tag on him as well. But he is set to be an unrestricted free agent in 2026 if, again, they don't use that franchise tag. He could technically be an unrestricted free agent next year, right? So that's also, just piling on top of this situation with T. Higgins. And then not to mention, right, you're already, cutting out a big part of your cap space to Joe Burrow, as you should, right? Because he is the Cincinnati Bengals and everything like that. He is what makes them go. So on this topic on handling the wide receivers and where things stand right now, their general manager, Duke Tobin, had the following to say on the entire situation. He said, I can't find it. Here it is. It's going to be hard. We feel like we have the resources to do it, but it all depends on how the negotiation goes and whether they're willing to accept wanting to come back at a number that makes sense for everybody. And pretty direct statement there, right? No dancing around it, right? He kept it pretty honest and just pretty straightforward, right? With, yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, he feels, and he's being pretty optimistic as well, that he can get it done. But, in saying, trying to find a number that makes everybody happy, you could sort of incline that this could be heading for them maybe offering more than likely T. Higgins a little bit less money because, Jamar, they if they would have paid him last offseason, right, this next season that we just had, right, wouldn't have looked so bad if they already gave him that money. But now it's driven up that price tag a little bit more because he just had a historical season. And, instead of maybe just resetting the market by a little bit, now maybe it's another whole number. And I know we're just kind of splitting hairs there a little bit when we're talking about that, but it could make a big difference. And, deciding to wait might not have paid off for the Bengals. And, T. Higgins, in such an inflated wide receiver market with a lot of the attention going on the offense, right? Why, in his mindset, potentially he could be thinking, why would I take less money, right? Like, I decided to play on the franchise tag. I didn't really make a big fuss about it. He played it out like a true professional, and credit to him. So after a season like that, he could be thinking, why should I take less money now if I just played on the franchise tag, right? And I'm sure they're going to get a bunch of offers for him as well in, free agency and things like that, with a lot of teams needing number one guys, guys and teams like the Patriots jump out at you, the Commanders, also the Chargers. All those teams have some of the most money and cap space this upcoming offseason as well, right? The Commanders have the third most cap space available at $78 million. The Patriots have the most cap space at $120 million, and the Chargers aren't too far behind at $63 million as well. So T. Higgins, I'm not worried that he's not going to have any other suitors, right? There's going to be a bunch of people interested in him. So to accommodate him and his contract, there's going to be a bunch of other teams that are willing to pay a little bit more. And that could wind up pretty detrimental for the Bengals because, yes, they still have Burrow, and I'm pretty confident that they're not going to let Jamar walk out the door, obviously. But to try and fit everybody into, to give everybody a piece of the pie according to, their performance and their importance to this team, it gets pretty narrow when you're trying to split it up with a lot of money going to three guys, right? It gets really tough to Joe Burrow, I think $46 million or have a $46 million cap hit this year from his contract. And then, you talk about Jamar Chase and where he could be at. The wide receiver market right now, I believe, is $35 million per year to Justin Jefferson. So after a historic year like Jamar had, he could be pushing 36 and a half or something like that, right? And the Bengals, because they decided to wait and they're not going to let him walk out the door, could give him a huge piece of the metaphorical pie, I should say. So that's a lot going to Joe, and that's a lot being divided also to Jamar Chase. And then if you're going to give T. Higgins around like 27, 30 million, that's almost the entire thing for a team that all season we've been saying that their defense needs a lot of help. This defense is what's holding them back, so you'd naturally think that you would want to add some guys in the offseason, but you can't do that if you're paying all these guys like 2/3 of the pie, or actually like 3/4 of it probably, and you're leaving too little of a space to try and divide it and get guys in. So that's the problem that the Bengals face right now. I think this is definitely trending towards T. Higgins probably departing, because, it's great to have T. Higgins, but when you think about it, as a defense, and you're bringing back Al Golden, who had some good success over there at Notre Dame, I'd imagine that they'd want to prioritize their defense a little bit more. And when you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow, not to diminish anything that T. Higgins has done, because I think he could be a number one, Joe covers up a lot of things, being the kind of quarterback that he is. So having him, Jamar, and probably drafting someone, I think they're at pick 17, I believe, this year. Yeah, they're at 17 this year. So that's a pretty decent area where you can look at guys like, I don't know, like Emeka Buka potentially, or Luther Burden could also be in and around there. There's a couple options for the Bengals to still draft guys, talented guys on the offensive side of the ball. So that's where I think it stands right now. Their general manager, Duke Tobin, is being optimistic, holding out hope, but it probably would get a little bit tough for T. Higgins to do them another solid, right? Instead of doing what's best for himself, getting paid accordingly, right? I think that's also very important. So we'll see what ends up happening. We're about a month away from the start of free agency, and it always gets crazy in the first couple days. So we'll hold out for news closer to free agency around T. Higgins and the Bengals. But for right now, we're going to move on to our second topic. We're not going to move too far off of general managers, because we're going to go over to New York and discuss what Giants general manager Joe Schoen had to say about where their head's at in regards to the number 3 overall pick. There's a lot of options, and Joe Schoen is not getting attached too much to any certain prospect, right? He's keeping a pretty open mind on what the Giants will do at number 3. So we'll give him a couple options to consider, and we'll decide what the best option is when we return after this break.